So I shouldn't even use my camera. It's basically fucked, right?
I mean, you can if you want the portrait. If you want like clips, if you want to clip it, it'll be easy if it's portrait.
Right. I'm just gonna be like my ideal client.
That's actually hilarious. We should just do
just like a spoof.
Let's just pretend you're an athlete with the pitch lab and be like, so Frank, you started at 88. Now you're at 102. How did that happen?
Yeah, my ideal client. Okay. Ideal client. Fuck.
All right. So I kind of just want to dive into like what has been top of mind right now, which is like how we're trying to increase pitching velocity, right? And like how we're training to increase pitching velocity, because I feel like we've had a couple revelations lately. And so I want to get into a little bit of that. But
yeah, so basically for me, like after not throwing for about what, like 8 months, like when we started training, or when I started training, because you were training probably how long before me?
yeah, I was training for like a little bit, maybe like a month or two.
Okay, so like a month or two. I kind of went in a little bit colder, but then we trained for about 3 days, like leading up to that week, and kind of wanted to get like basically like a baseline bullpen. And then it actually, well, I mean, I got up to 87.8, which was like kind of my goal anyways, because I wanted to like, even not after not throwing for a while, I was like, I'll still, be able to kind of get up to 87.8 or 87 at least. And then from there, I was like, okay. Then after, I was like, give me like one more week, I'll be up to 90, like no problem. And then kind of the things we were doing in our program, we didn't really have a structured program. We were just kind of lifting like mobility stuff, and then strength wise, maybe, bench, but we weren't, squatting or doing any legs. Or we did like the belt squat.
Yeah, it was basically just, I mean, from my side, it was just like, okay, let's just lift heavy. There wasn't really like any plan.
Yeah, lift heavy and then do mobility.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and mobility was a huge one because,
yeah,
I mean, for me anyway, like I had really limited mobility, so I was just like, all right, let's focus on this. This should get me to throw harder.
Yeah.
And the thing with mobility for me though, it's like it makes me feel way better, and I think it gives me the potential to throw hard.
Mm-hmm.
But it actually hasn't, and I think the missing component is like the power and the speed.
Yeah.
Which is what we'll get into a little bit. But like, what have you kind of seen mobility do with you?
So mobility is like when I threw like the hardest was because I started doing more mobility, where before I was only focused on strength. And like I got my strength up pretty high like during college. I was like squatting 5 plates, reverse lunging 4 plates, and then like doing like crazy weighted pull-ups. But then I was also throwing like not very hard.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just got away from all strength stuff and just did like mobility, like try to get more flexible. And then I actually saw like myself throw harder. Mm-hmm. But then obviously I think it goes to like a certain extent. Like you only get up to a certain max with just doing mobility.
Yeah.
But I think it just opened up like more areas of just like the throw in general.
Yeah, I mean like mobility is like, it's kind of like the meta right now, right? With like Yamamoto going viral with like all those back bridges and stuff like that, how flexible he is. And so it kind of became a thing where it's like, oh, all I need is mobility. I don't need to be strong or powerful, because we see Yamamoto who's just like,
yeah, he's just super
like
mobile.
Rubber band throwing sitting 97, and it's like, okay, that's the way. But it's kind of like, we also hopped on that wave. I feel like I definitely did. And what I kind of figure out now is like, yes, mobility is a huge part of it, for being healthy, even increasing pitching velocity. But it's not, as nothing is really like the be all end all, like the one unlock, right? It's just a component of building a body that's able to produce more force. And that's kind of how I see it. It's just like a small piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, it's definitely a small piece of the puzzle. And I think with Yamamoto, it gets like, you know, you only see like the surface level of kind of what his training is. So you probably see him do like, you know, back bridges and just like the javelin and mobility, just all types of mobility stuff. But like, I think people don't understand that, you know, Japanese players, they have like a lot of strength that they build up when they're younger playing. That's not stuff in the weight room, but just like, you know, they're way more advanced in like their youth training, I think, with like creating really good habits, how to use your body way better than kind of Americans and like the youth when it comes to like club baseball here. Like Japan, they're working on way more fundamental stuff that like you won't even hear about here. Whether it's like just using all your power into the throw when they're like 10 years, like super young, you know. So like I think he's built up a lot of like strength and power that's strictly basically the throw instead of just worrying about like getting stronger in the weight room because he's never he literally says he's never like lifted a weight in his life and he doesn't want to.
Can you dive into that a little bit more though? Like when you say like specific strength, and this is something that we kind of like dove into a little bit, right? With like, how Trevor Bauer threw 98 without ever lifting a weight, stuff like that. But like, how does that actually happen? Have you dove into that yet?
So I haven't dove into it enough, but like if you think about it, right, like you're familiar with like Japanese like baseball, like they'll throw like 200 pitches a game.
Yeah.
And like obviously that's deemed as like dangerous in the US, but like they're so fine tuned with their mechanics and like how like basically they're so light years advanced in like how they throw with their mechanics that they're able to, you know, take on that kind of workload even at a young age to where it's like, yeah, obviously you're not going to have a 12, 15-year-old in the US do it because like he's probably not throwing properly to even throw. Like there'll be, you know, they'll arm or hurt after like 40 pitches.
Yeah.
Where I've heard like, you know, Saito Yuki. He had like the famous game in the Koshien against Tanaka, but he pitched like 200 pitches back to back games, like the semifinal and then the final. And he says the only thing that got sore that like gave out while he was pitching was his legs. He says his legs were just completely toast, but his arm and stuff was completely fine. And that's just because he was just throwing properly and like actually using his lower half in the throw, and that's what should be sore after a long game. It's not your actual arm itself, it's just like you using your whole body. But I think you're talking what the strength of like they've built. Yeah, basically the strength of like, you know, if you throw that many times from a young age, is like you're gonna build strength in that specific movement, right?
So like specific throwing strength just from throwing?
Yeah, it's just from throwing. Like your body's so used to, you know, that motion of like you're gonna get stronger and stronger as you get older.
Yeah.
Because throwing is a workout in itself.
No, that's what I was gonna say. It was like, what's the best upper body plyometric exercise for throwers?
Yes, throwing.
It's like throwing itself, like throwing hard. You know, it's like that's like pretty much the best upper body workout there is for baseball players.
100%.
You can try all of this like speed work on the upper body, but you're not going to replicate the speed at what like pitching requires, right? So
it's the best really rotational workout.
Yeah. And so so like we kind of went through that mobility meta, the mobility wave, which really helped, I think, you know, just overall. But then now we're shifting to a little bit more of, okay, working on mobility didn't get me from, you know, like a training velocity low 90s to the mid 90s like I thought it would. And so now it's like, okay, what's the next? What's the missing thing that we weren't doing? And so that's when that's what we're kind of diving into now, right? Which is like the power, the impulse, force generation type stuff. And so what have you kind of found with that?
So basically, like force absorption, right? Like being able to absorb the actual strength that you have into like the actual throw. You know, we've looked into just a little bit about it, and you know, things like isometrics. You know, the more you train it, and the higher level you're able to get with that, you know, should equal to basically being able to absorb more force, you know, throughout different parts of your body.
Yeah.
And that's something where we're going to start looking into more and start training. And then figuring out like what kind of thrower you are, right? Is like not training the opposite way of what works for you technically. So like elastic and like reactive throwers, basically, you know, like what you kind of figured out that you're produce a lot of force but not fast, right?
I want to backtrack a little bit though with like what you're talking about with force absorption.
Yeah.
Because like I don't really see it as force absorption. I see it more as like, so like we were diving into like why if you're a super strong guy, why can't you throw hard, right? And it's because like this is like a direct correlation to me because that's the kind of guy that I am. It's like I have a lot of strength, I can produce this amount of force, but in the pitching delivery or something like you have such a small window to be able to tap into that force. And so it becomes more about, okay, how much of that force can you tap into?
Yeah.
And that just becomes like, you know, the elastic training, like the power training of like how much can you tap into. And so I see it more of like how much force can you produce instead of like absorb, because you need to create that force to be absorbed.
Yeah.
Right. And so what do you kind of mean by force absorption?
So like wait, so you're saying like basically how much force can you produce and how much force of that can you use?
So like so like for example, like you know in the pitching delivery, you need to create force first, right? So it's like, okay, I'm in my leg lift, and then it's like my back leg is creating this force. I'm creating like all of this force, and then obviously that's like power type training to see to maximize how much force you can create.
Yeah.
And then all the energy is coming up the chain.
Yeah.
And then this, like the upper body, is more like the force absorption.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's kind of how I see it. And so I think we need to dive into it a little bit more, but is that kind of like what you think about?
Yeah, so like basically like your lower half, right, is what starts that force production.
Yeah.
And then basically as it goes up the chain, if there's any type of, you know, block, or better word is like it can't absorb, like your chest or whatever it is can't absorb that force that your lower half produced, then you're only going to use like a small percentage of what it actually can produce.
Yeah.
So if your chest isn't like, you know, prepped to basically absorb that all that force that your lower half created, then you're not going to see the result basically into the throw. So then one, you have to figure out how much force is your lower half actually producing, and then two is like, is my upper half able to transfer or actually absorb that force that your lower half created?
Yeah.
And then if you're able to train it, and like that's the thing is like, you know, obviously it's going to be different for each guy, but right now for us, it's like we know we probably produce enough force from the ground with our lower half to be able to throw harder than we are. So it's like trying to figure out how we're going to train our upper half to basically intake that force.
Yeah. No, this is where it gets like complicated, and something that, you know, I feel like we haven't dove into enough to really be able to give a concrete answer. But like the studies have shown that, you know, most high level athletes, pitchers, produce enough force from the lower body that it's just they're losing it a lot in the upper body because it's not like they're not able to transfer it. But then it's also like, okay, but like why wouldn't we want to produce even more force in the lower body? right? And like there's no, this is where like it's out of my scope of like expertise, is where like, okay, in my mind is like, let's maximize however much force that we can create,
Mm-hmm.
which should send more up the chain.
Yeah.
But is it like, oh, there's a cap to where like your upper body can only absorb like X, if I'm
X
producing like
amount.
1,000 units of energy or something, right?
Yeah.
And it can only absorb 300. Like if I take that from 1,000 to 1,500, is that still only going to be 300 here?
Yeah.
Like, you know,
I feel like, I mean, obviously I don't know this like exactly, but it would make sense that, you know, it doesn't matter how much more force you're producing, you know, in your lower half. Like your intake is your intake from your upper half. Like just because you're producing more, it's not going to like force feed itself, you know, through the to the upper half. That
you think so?
I think so. Yeah, I don't believe so, because then at that point I feel like there would just be a larger disconnect with, you know, the lower half and upper half. And I think what it is like once your upper body or your chest or whatever it is that is starting to recognize that it can actually accept more force from the lower half, that's when training, you know, being able to produce more from the lower half will be beneficial, because then I think they'll go hand in hand. It's like, you know, okay, now it's starting to slowly accept more and more, and then you're producing more and more from the lower half, and it'll be kind of an uptrend from there.
No, that's
But what do you
interesting.
think? Do you think you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that's where, you know, the training comes in, where it's like, okay, lower body, let's maximize how much force. So obviously, like, build strength first and then be able to tap into that, right? That's kind of like the training for the lower body. And then for the upper body, it's more about like force absorption, like getting like really strong.
Yeah.
Because like, and I feel like that makes sense. It's like, okay, let's continue to build the amount of force that you can produce, and then let's continue to build how much we can absorb. And then as these climb up, right, that's when you see massive amounts of improvement. And like when I looked into it a little bit with the pec, because I was like, oh, is bench good for pitches? And it's, you know, the debate. But like the one thing that was very interesting was the pec has to be extremely strong in eccentric and isometric ranges to be able to let your so with the muscle tendon unit, there's a muscle and then like there's the tendons, right? And so the muscles have to be really strong to be able to stabilize for your tendons to do the work. And so it makes sense to where like if the pec isn't strong enough to stabilize and like absorb, then the tendons can't do its full thing.
Right.
Which, you know, can put you in like risk of injury and just like not utilizing the amount of force that you're actually bringing up the chain.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and that's probably where like you see like high level throwers actually get into injury, and it's not because they're mechanics. You know, sometimes it is mechanics, but I know like Garrett Cole, they're talking about like a couple of his mechanical deficiencies that they think led to his injury, but it's probably just like their, you know, upper half isn't actually able to withstand that force that their lower half's created. So like even like Otani is like, obviously he produces like a crazy amount of force, but you know, if his, even if his elbow or, you know, upper half in general isn't like actually prepped to take in that force, then, you know, it's always like he's going to compensate and like still be able to throw at like, you know, 100 miles per hour, but you know, it's not going to be able to withstand that much force constantly.
Yeah. No, for sure. And so, I mean, that's the next phase, right? Which is like we're trying to figure out how to do these things. We're starting to figure out, okay, like this is what needs to happen. Like, you know, common train of thought right now is like, oh, just get bigger, stronger, you'll throw harder. You know, but like at a certain point, that doesn't happen anymore. And once you build that strength base, it's like, okay, now you need to convert it into more impulse power type training. That's where we kind of at right now.
Yeah.
And so what have we kind of experimented with, or what are we going to be doing on your end? Because
Yeah.
we're on different programs.
Yeah.
And so, like, what are you going to be doing to actually work on that?
So like, obviously we're like two different types of pitchers, and like you found out that you're going to be, you produce a lot of force, and you just have to be able to kind of fire it faster, right? With me, it's like I've kind of recently figured out that my central nervous system can actually fire. It's basically kind of, you know, being able to fire, the force that I actually am creating. So I have a disconnect with basically the force I produce and like how well I can actually fire that force. So I found out that I can if I wanted to, but I'm not doing that right now. And like that's what I kind of have to figure out is like I have the ability to fire the force that I'm producing, but I'm just not right now. So it's like putting two puzzle pieces together, if that makes sense.
Wait, hang on. Let's backtrack a little bit.
If that makes sense.
What does the CNS have to do with anything?
So your central nervous system just being able to kind of fire at a quick moment. So like if you're, not able to actually, what is it, like fire your ability, like produce the force that you actually have, then that's what I'm saying. That's what we talked about. You're leaving a lot like on the table, a lot of your strength, a lot of your power on the table.
Yeah, because like what I didn't really realize early in my career was like a lot of this power type training and even strength type training can be um like connections, right, with the brain to the muscle.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's kind of what it is, right? CNS
Yeah.
is like, okay, like it's not just about the muscle being able to contract quicker.
No.
It's like improving the signal from the brain to that muscle. And obviously the CNS has a lot to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally the thing that connects everything.
Yeah.
And so is that kind of what?
Yeah, exactly. So like for me, it's like naturally sometimes like people's like athletes' brains are able to kind of fire on a quick note, whether it's just from like genetics or like the sports they kind of play when they're younger. But if you're not in a high like CNS situation where you need to like kind of fire on a quick instant, you basically have to train that to fire, and that's like neurological. You have to like teach your brain basically how to fire when it needs to, which is basically on the mound.
Oh yeah. But is that what you're good at?
No, so I found out that I have the ability to do it, but I'm not using it for some reason.
Oh, on the mound.
Yeah.
Got you.
So that's what I need to figure out, and that's what I need to ultimately like put two and two together.
And is that, in your opinion, right now? Like, obviously, we're diving into it. We're not experts, but like, a lot of pitching is theories and just seeing what works, what doesn't. Different things work for different people, and so in your mind, do you feel like that is a weight room thing or is that a throwing thing?
So me specifically, I think it could be a little bit of both, right? Where there's things you could definitely do in the weight room that train your brain and train your body to fire in a quick instant. And then, same with throwing as well. It's like, there's different variations of throws that you could train to where it's telling your brain that like you have to go now, right? Whether it's like a catch and throw right away, but sometimes it's hard to kind of measure that out to see if it's going to actually translate to, yourself actually throwing, firing on the mound like that. But a lot of it's like I think it's just mental work and brain and trying to tell your brain to kind of turn on when it needs to and tell your body to fire.
Yeah, that's what's difficult about pitching, though, is like unless you have a whole motion capture setup, it's very difficult to get to the root cause of like, okay, what is actually happening?
Mm-hmm.
Like we can have all of these theories and stuff like that, but like when you can actually see the motion capture, see like the energy transferring, and then it's like, oh, there's leaks here, there's leaks there. Obviously, you know, there are coaches who are really good at that, like, you know, the coaches we have at the Pitcher Lab.
Yeah.
Like, they can see that through video, you know, and have like a 90+% accuracy doing that. But like, that's what makes it difficult is when you don't actually have the objective data, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. It's not It's not easy like to measure.
Yeah.
Like it is like a weight room lift or like a squat or a bench. It's like, you know, if you're not lifting heavy, then you know that you're weak, which is like, you could say that with the throw too. If your velocity's down, there's obviously something wrong, but there's like a million things that could be wrong.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, there's just a lot of variables in the throw itself.
But I mean, yeah. So, like for me, it's like how I think about it is, you know, I want to maximize my training both in the weight room and the throwing, right?
Mhm.
Like I don't want to take it easy on either side. And so with the weight room stuff, and we kind of touched on it, like, oh, we were lifting heavy, you know, building strength, stuff like that. But you know, I actually did an assessment today with it. Is like, what kind of athlete are you? What kind of things have to happen for you to accomplish a goal? And so I did like, you know, vertical jumps, broad jumps, sprints, stuff like that.
Mhm.
And we actually got these like objective measurements of
Yeah.
like, okay, how long are you staying on the ground when you're jumping? Like for example, depth jump. I did like I was on a box and then see how high and how quickly I can get off the ground,
Mhm.
right? And like all of these tests showed that I had a lot of force. So I had a lot of strength force built up, but it took me too long to tap into that. And so if you think about a squat, if you're doing a max effort squat, right? You're here and then you have all of this time like to get up and produce all that force. Versus, I mean, the pitching delivery is like milliseconds. It's like bang, okay, you need to produce it like right here. And so that's kind of like the thing that I'm going to be working on the most to throw 100 is how much of that force that I built can I tap into in the shortest amount of time, but also maintain what makes me good, which is being a crazy force production athlete. And so like training that plus the elasticity, the power, the impulse type training that actually allows me to tap into that. And then obviously I'm going to look into like the upper body force absorption training. That's kind of what I'm doing on the weight room side. And on the throwing side, it's more, I'm shifting more into just like pure output. At this point, like we were messing around with mechanics, and like when you get domed, it's a rough scene.
Mechanical changes will like never happen on the mound. If that makes sense. And I figured that out, and it's like you always feel like you could make a mechanical change on the mound when you're trying to throw hard, but it never actually happens. Like, especially if you're like working on things with your mechanics, like the last thing you want to do is just jump on a mound and start throwing and like making those adjustments, because you'll never see an actual change in your mechanics or delivery.
And that's what we found, right? Was like, we're trying to make all these mechanical changes, and then it's like, all right, bro, let's go velo day. And then what happens? Like your body just reverts back to what it knows best. Right? It's a survival machine. And so it's not going to be like, oh, you know, we're going to just try something new today. It's like, nah, let's just revert back to our old mechanics and try to accomplish that task. And so, you know, we were working on the drift, and then it's like I look back at video, and then on my velo days, it's like I go back to my slow, like, and that's why we kind of started incorporating those 90% days of like, let's not put so much pressure on ourselves to throw a velo day, but let's still let's try to make more mechanical changes. Right. And so, I mean, we did that for a while, but then now I'm kind of getting away from it because the way I really like to build mechanics is molding my mechanics through specific drills. So like I did a pull down day the other day, right? I love the pull down because it teaches my lead leg to block like crazy. Like it's like the best way to teach yourself to just lead leg block because you have so much linear momentum and you have to stop that to throw gas, right? And so
I feel like that works good for you because, like you were talking about earlier, you do produce a crazy amount of force. And even if it's something where, you know, it takes a while. So, like, obviously, the pull down, you have linear momentum, you're sprinting, so you can kind of gather everything and then just go. And then, obviously, you're able to train your, you know, your lead leg block because of that. But I don't think that's going to be good for like every type of thrower, especially if you're having trouble kind of firing right, like on the mound, because you know it's not going to be like a pull down where you're able to kind of create momentum with your sprint. You got to be able to like train your body or train your nervous system to like go like right away.
Yeah.
So I think the best analogy, honestly, just like thinking of it now, is like when someone's like dunking in basketball, right? Like sometimes they have, you know, like a fast breakaway dunk, and they're able to like sprint and gather and get as much, you know, force and vertical jump as possible. Where sometimes like they're, you know, middle of a play, they have to like basically go at a split second to dunk.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something where it's like your nervous system is like, I guess on that like fight or flight mode where it's like I have to like go now, like boom, like you don't have a choice, and like your brain just automatically tells you to go.
Yeah.
And do you kind of agree with that?
Well, in my opinion, it's kind of like, okay. So what's the alternative? Like, do you just drill lead leg block? Like you know.
So you're talking about like working on lead leg block?
Well, yeah, because like you said, sometimes for like pull downs might not work for everyone, right? And I totally agree. But what's the alternative
for lead leg block?
Yeah, for something like that.
There's like probably different drills where it's like either, you know, like throwing on like that way on a mound, like facing the mound where you have it's a little bit up, so when you're throwing, it automatically kind of puts you in that block position because the ground is already, you know, higher level. But I feel like just drill work, and you know, there's probably a bunch of different types of drills you can work on it, but I think you do have a point with like having to kind of put the brakes on all that force that you're producing could be something that's super good for working on that lead leg block.
Yeah.
And that's just like a mechanical thing, right?
Yeah.
Where you're working on, where when I was talking about the teaching your body to kind of fire on a split second, that's something that's like completely different with pull downs and training your brain, I guess.
Yeah.
And your body connection.
No, I think so. It's just like for me, like going back to what I was saying was like my approach to it, and this might change. You know, it's like I might have to drill something if I see something, but like, you know, I've done a bunch of mocaps, and there's never been a thing where it's like, oh, there's a glaring issue. And so, like, for the most part, my mechanics are pretty good. And so, like, for me, it's just about like molding my mechanics to be even better. So I gave you the example of the pull down to mold my front like lead leg block to be good, right? And so like tomorrow I'm going to be doing a lot of roll-ins.
Yeah.
To teach like separation and like, you know, spinal extension, getting into these.
Yeah.
And then being out of fire because my spine is still a little bit like stiff.
Yeah.
And so I'd rather do that and like try to throw it as hard as I can and do more of what I see is actually helping the velocity go up versus drilling like, oh, okay, let's stay here and like let's you know, that's kind of like my approach with it and how I've done it. You know, it might not be the best way, but it's just kind of like what has worked for me in the past. And you know, not everything that's worked for you in the past is going to work for you now. And so I'm still going through the experimenting period. But pretty much that's how I went from 78 to 96, was like doing a bunch of these movements. And I didn't even think about mechanics, to be honest. It was just like, it just molded into a good set of mechanics.
And then you're also probably, during that time, you were probably also just training your your body to just like go like fire basically too, because like that's like the whole theory behind like throw hard as much as you can, right? Because like what we talked about is like throwing is like the best, upper body workout, rotational workout. So the more you're actually able to do that at a high intensity, high velocity, it's like you're just teaching your body to like go and like reach those heights of velocity, right?
Yeah.
So that's like basically it's like realistically if you did have like, you know, a lot of high intensity days throughout a long period course of time and you're able to recover and stay healthy, it's like you'll probably see an increase in velocity. Just like as if you think about it, if you benched 3 times a week, max effort, and you're actually able to recover and do that and stay healthy, like it's inevitable that your bench is going to go up.
Yeah.
Basically, regardless of how well your mechanics are when it comes to the bench press or how well your mechanics are to the throw. If you're able to stay healthy and not injure yourself during that time, like you're probably going to increase velocity, right? And that's probably, I feel like, what a lot of it came from too, right? You think when you jumped like that big velo when you were younger, all the way up to like 96.
Oh yeah, it was just pure like force production, I would say.
Yeah, just working.
Rapidly increasing force production. Just like my squat went from, I was squatting 135 pounds to like 450 plus, in that time, and deadlifting a crazy amount, like pulling down like low hundreds.
Yeah.
It was literally just a period of how much force can we literally create, and it got me to the mid 90s, right? But like that's what I thought was going to get me to 100. Just continuing to do that, but that's when my body started to break down. It was like, okay, going from a 500-pound squat to 700 probably isn't the smartest thing for a baseball player. It's probably not going to like lead to much performance increase, or like be safe for the body, right?
Yeah, probably not.
So,
especially like, when we talk about it won't really help you at this point too if you're not able to absorb that force that you constantly keep increasing. I mean, we see that when we talk to like younger kids that are like struggling with gaining velocity, but they're super strong in the weight room.
oh yeah,
It's like, you're not using any of the strength that you're creating. So it's like being able to use a higher percentage of the strength that you already have and the force that you already produce into the throw.
and just and the way you do that is mechanics and speed and power, right?
Yeah,
Like
being able to transfer it.
those are like completely different rabbit holes that you can go down. It's like the impulse type training in the weight room. How much of that force can you tap into? And then it's like, okay, like let's make sure that none of this force is like, or energy is getting leaked out in our pitching delivery, which is like completely different things you could spend your whole life studying.
Yeah. And everything kind of goes hand in hand too. Like mechanics play into the part of your energy transfer. Your energy transfer can affect your mechanics because if you think about it, a lot of times if you feel like you have like a mechanical deficiency and it's super hard to correct, sometimes it could just be like since your different parts of your body aren't allowing the energy to flow through, that your mechanics will actually hinder because of it. Do you kind of agree with that? Like, let's say, so for me, I sometimes I think about this as like, I get into trouble with my upper half mechanics and my pushy arm, and that's like something I'm working on with like my glove side and things. But basically, it could have to do with the force that I'm creating with my lower half. It's coming up the kinetic chain, and basically my chest isn't allowing it to transfer through there, that I will start to just kind of pull my arm through instead of letting my chest absorb that force and going and having it transfer all the way up to the throw. So you know, your body's always going to compensate. Pitchers are like elite compensators. So it's like, you know, if your energy is going to have, you know, like stop somewhere, it's going to want to go somewhere else. And like that could change your mechanics and the way you actually throw. Because obviously everyone has different mechanics and the way they transfer energy.
The thing that I'm kind of get stuck on is like, but even if you create really good force absorption, like for example, in like the upper body, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you're just going to create an elite pattern.
No, yeah, definitely not. But it will make it easier.
Yeah.
Don't you think it would make it easier? Because like, if your chest is finally allowing the energy to flow through, then it's going to be easier for you to basically tap into that instead of like the energy transferring. Oh, I have a block. Okay, I have to compensate and use it somewhere else.
It's interesting because, like, I see it as, and we might have to wrap it up pretty soon.
Yeah.
But I actually see it as two completely separate things. So you could have like a really good upper body that can absorb all this force, right? But you still need to get to that pattern to be able to tap into all of that energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, like, I guess that's where we have to dive into it a little bit more. Is like, you know, we're creating the body to be able to transfer all that energy and actually produce this force.
Yeah.
That's step one. Or like, you know, the frame part of it is like building the body.
Right, right.
But then you actually have to be able to utilize that in the pitching motion, which is where the biomechanics and pitching mechanics come in.
So let me ask you this real quick before we wrap it up. Let's say someone's having issues with absorbing the force right through their chest, but they're able to pattern their mechanics perfectly, but there's still that block.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think happens there?
I think, well...
You think there's still, like, the chest isn't going to absorb?
Well, yeah, we talk a lot about the chest, but, like, there's probably so much that goes into it.
Yeah, like your ribs.
Ribs, like, even thoracic extension.
Thoracic spine, yeah.
The more you can go here, the more energy. And so, like, in that case, I would say, and I don't know if you'd agree with it, but, like, if they have good patterns, but, like, you can just see on a motion capture or something, there's just, like, no energy coming up. Then it's just like, bro, we need to, like, work on something here. It might be, you know, like something with the rib cage or something with like pec strength or something like that to actually allow more of that energy to transfer up.
Yeah.
But having that good pattern just helps it, like, it's just like a clearer pathway for the energy to transfer instead of like if you have kind of crappy patterns and it's like there's more like friction for it to come up.
I bet it allows, you know, just having a good pattern just still allows a little more energy to transfer through.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
But like you said, like we could see guys with like super good patterns and move super well and have good mechanics. But it's still not, you know, making them throw harder.
Yeah.
And that's probably just because of, you know, force absorption either through the ribs or chest or whatnot. But
yeah.
But I think, yeah, we talked a lot about, you know, today.
This was just like something that was top of mind because, I mean, like we can talk about velocity development all day, but it's like, this is our journeys. This is what we're literally working on right now. It's not like, oh, we just had a random talk about what we think. It's like, no, we're the guinea pigs. Like we're literally going through this right now. Like, you know, like you might know my story of trying to throw 100. Frank, I know you're trying to get to 95. We're still trying to play. And so, like, we have skin in the game. I feel like that's what kind of can make it a little bit different. It's like, it's not just like we're promoting the system of like, this is how you gain pitching velocity. No, it's like we're literally going through all of this. What we're saying right now isn't just like, just a random like bunch of like BS. It's like, no, it's actually like what we're actually doing, what we've been studying, right? What we've seen from our experience and like what we're actually incorporating into our day-to-day, which is, you know, you can see in a lot of the vlogs what we actually do. And so I feel like that's what is missing a little bit in the baseball is like there's not much skin in the game.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, you see guys that are, you know, offering training or whatever to, you know, the youth or college or even some professional, but basically it's like unless they're kind of showing, themselves do it and, see how it's working and, actually have a proof of concept, then it becomes harder to follow. Obviously there can be good coaches out there that, aren't playing anymore, aren't throwing themselves actively. But I think it's nice to see a proof of concept when it comes to something as difficult as pitching and trying to gain velocity, because the whole objective of this whole thing is to basically simplify things to where, you have a direct path to that goal. And there's really nothing like that right now when it comes to gaining velocity, right? Or else there wouldn't be so many different theories, so many different opinions on actually gaining velocity. But that's what we're trying to do, and it's like it can be, super complicated, and we might not ultimately get to that like proven path of this is exactly how you're gonna throw 95 or throw 100 or throw 90. Yeah, I mean, I hope so.
I think there will be like a way better system though than what it is right now.
Yeah,
but
something
right now
that's
it's
proven.
like the most complicated thing in the world. Like
no, it really is.
You see all of these different things, and there's no like, in anything else. Like, okay, we're trying to build strength, we're trying to build power. Like, there's a clear process, and I know that pitching is way more complicated than that, but it shouldn't be. And like how my brain works, I don't know about how yours is. Like, I need it to be simple. I can't be like scattered like all of this like stuff. It has to all make sense in the end. And so that's what we kind of doing. But
and we'll get there, especially like, when you see different industries and them overcomplicating even like the health industry of like losing weight or just getting, physically, more aesthetic. It's like that's where we want to take it, to where it might not be the only way to do it, but it's one way that we know that works.
Yeah, and like there's proof of it.
Yeah.
And we become living proof of it. But
exactly.
Dude, this has been good, man.
Yeah. Good work.